Hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week my guest is actor, impersonator, writer, historian, pantomime dame, West End star, small screen star and movie star. Yes, it's a long list this week. It's the very amusing David Benson. We talk about his long career, what it was like to perform for Her Majesty, and of course writing pantomime. We do talk about a few adult themes in this episode, so whilst not explicit, I would not recommend this episode to listeners under the age of 18. So please, sit back and enjoy the latest Panto podcast. My guest today is...
Oh, we're on.
We're on, yes. Goodness,
did I say, I hope I didn't say anything indiscreet.
No, not at all. Well, my guest today is the wonderful... very talented and actor extraordinaire, West End star, small screen star.
I describe myself as a mini star.
A mini star and also a big screen star, sort of.
What?
With the Blade Runner.
Oh, well, blink and you'll miss it. I mean, I'll tell you the story of Blade Runner 2049, well, which was actually quite panto in a way. I'll tell you that now because I went for the audition. And I thought, I don't even play the piano. To play Liberace. They wanted someone to play a hologram Liberace. I said, I don't play. I can fake it. But they said, well, come to the audition. And so I did. And they said, here's a clip of Liberace playing Mac the Knife on his TV show. So learn the kind of movements. So I did. And then literally the audition was a clavinova on a couple of plastic chairs to act as a grand piano. And I just did all the smiles and all the looks to the camera the way Liberace did, and to my astonishment was cast in Blade Runner 2049, the remake of Blade Runner, as the hologram of Liberace. Went over to Budapest where they filmed it and had a costume that any panto dame or panto character would absolutely kill for. It was the best costume, the lady told me who made it, in the whole movie. Everyone wanted to try it on. It was a full Liberace stage outfit, white fur, cape, with massive collar. It must have stretched about 3 yards across the floor with silver sequined lining. Listen to that, dames. I mean, it was amazing. And a white suit with Diamante on it, and the wig and the makeup. And I looked in the mirror and I thought, it's Liberace. I couldn't believe it. And so they said, the director who was working on that sequence, his name is Joe Walker, said, how do you want to do it? And I said, well, I see him making this huge entrance. Now, could I run onto the stage so that the whole cape sweeps up behind me when I stop? And then I can raise my arms and you'll get all the inside of the cape with the silver sequins. It'll look amazing. And he was really excited. And the next day we did exactly that, just the way I wanted it. I came running onto the stage, did this about 12 times, stopped the cape. I mean, everyone in the studio applauded and they said, you nailed it. It was amazing. Went to see the film. The whole thing was cut.
You're in the trailer.
All you see is you see a little moment with Harrison Ford going through a disused kind of Las Vegas showroom, and these holograms are flashing up behind him. You see Marilyn, you see Elvis, and then for a second you see Liberace, just a little bit with me at the piano, raising like I've just played a note. But the whole bit with the cape was never used, and that was the most expensive costume. And I really thought when we filmed it, that's going to change my life. When that goes out on film, what we just filmed, that's going to be so amazing. Everyone's going to want me. And when I went to see it with my friend Tom Eden, who's an actor who was in One Man, Two Governors with me, we sat there and I had that experience I should think actors must have had right since movies began, of going to see yourself and realising that your best moment ended up on the cutting room floor. And there's nothing you can do about it.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, anyway, we're here
but
today.
The credits.
We're here today with David Benson, anyway.
Yeah, hello. What, still?
Yes, at the moment.
Well, it's very nice to hear and talk about Panto.
Of course.
Because, I have done 2 or 3. I've actually been in 2 and I've written 2, which doesn't really make me a real veteran compared to many of the people you've interviewed who are real stalwarts and, absorbed in the whole world of Panto. To me, I'm an actor who was offered the part of Dame by great comedy director Cal McChrystal. who did the comedy directing on One Man, Two Governors, amongst many other things, Spider-Man films, Paddington. And he said, I think you'd make a very good dame. So I thought, well, I'm a complete outsider. I don't really... I'll act the part of a man who knows how to play the dame. That's how I'll do it. And, of course, he just said, well, the main thing is it's a bloke in a frock. Don't try and be a woman. Don't try and, pretend to be anything other than, like the great dames, Les Dawson. Or Arthur Askey. It was them in a frock doing the same shtick, and that was the joke. Really, it's a bloke. We don't have to pretend it's a real woman. So they can be humiliated. They can be pushed on, on the on the floor. They can whatever. All these things you can do to them. Actually, she really wouldn't want to do to a real woman. If there was a woman playing the part, you wouldn't want to be putting custard pies and humiliating and saying how ugly she is and all that. But you can do it if it's a bloke. And so I really enjoyed that. And that was in Newbury at the Corn Exchange back in 2004 when I first played Dame Foxy Trot, the panto written by Roy Hudd, which, of course, so it was classic panto script, all the great routines and what have you. And I had a lovely song which called What No Milk. Now, I wonder if any listeners remember that. What? No milk? Dear, 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 dear. Things are rather serious, I fear. Though it's not my usual habit, I should like to milk a rabbit. What? Something like that. Oh, well, milk. Dear, 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 dear. Very easy to get the audience singing. I remember Arthur Askey singing that on Parkinson. I wonder if any listeners are old enough to remember a long-lost episode of Parkinson with Arthur Askey where he sang the song What No Milk to huge applause from the audience. So it must have been written for him. I think it was written by Leslie Saroni. Anyone remember that name? Leslie Saroni.
It's a name I've heard before.
Oh, well, Leslie Saroni was a wonderful songwriter of comedy and novelty songs, 20s and 30s, recorded hundreds of them. He deserves a show on his own because if you put together a list of all the songs Leslie Saroni wrote, you'd have at least 2 albums of really Jollity Farm, or everybody knows Jollity Farm. That was Leslie Saroni, amongst many, many other songs. He also wrote a song called Let Me Carry Your Baghdad to Baghdad, Dad. Let me carry your Baghdad to Baghdad, Dad. Probably couldn't sing that now. It'd be deemed irresponsible. But anyway, Leslie Saroni.
So your dame look, then, where did that come from?
Well, I decided my dame look would be very simple because I'm too lazy to do elaborate makeup. And I thought I'll just suggest the character very, very simply. So I got some paints, just watercolour type face paints. Blue obviously for the eyes. And then I did an Ethel Merman eyebrow, which is a bow eyebrow. Ethel Merman in the 30s, 40s and 50s always had this very distinctive kind of arched eyebrow. So you paint that on. And I really can't be faffed with false eyelashes. I did try, but I found them so fiddly and so the effect so unpleasant and uncomical on me. I mean, they look good on other people, but not on me. So I decided, I paint them on. So I just do big kind of strokes up eyebrows, and on the top lid, and then these big, and that's fine. So of course by the end of the show it's all running down your face, so you're running around and sweating so much. Just a big lip, and just kept no base particularly, just kept it very, very simple, and that's the way I like it. Now someone like Beric Kaler, of course, really doesn't even bother with makeup. He just has a bit of red on the nose, and really that's it.
If that. And I love that. I think that's brilliant. The character is all in his performance and his connection with the audience, which is total and immediate because the audiences in York have been watching Beric for 40 years, and Martin Barris, of course, is brilliant too, who I know very well. And Martin Barris and I were in One Man, Two Governors as well. For a couple of years, I think, we did together. So we shared a dressing room with others, and we had a lot of laughs, I can tell you. I adore Martin Barris, and I think Beric's a genius, and I hope that the York Panto will go on in the form that it has done, in its crazy, surreal, completely following its own lead, the way it has been for 40 years, delighting York audiences. And of course, for York, your holiday season hasn't begun until you've heard Beric Kaler go
me babbies, me bairns. Then your Christmas has started. And that's something I hope that the people who are going to be taking on the Panto at Grand Opera House in York will appreciate and let Beric do it his own way.
So how did you get started then in the world of performing?
I came to performing really quite late. I didn't go to drama school. I did do a degree in theatre studies back in about 81, 82, 83, thereabouts. And then a lot of my friends went on to go to drama school and what have you. And I decided I didn't know what to do. I'm very strange. I don't really belong in this world. But I office temped for a while, and then I packed a bag when I was 23 and went to live in Edinburgh because I didn't know anybody there. I really felt very strongly that I needed to go on a journey of self-discovery. I had nothing to tie me down, I'm a single man, which I was then, am now, although I've had dalliances along the way.
Love that word, a dalliance.
Dalliances, well, attempts at really. I think I'm one of these people who's actually much happier as a single person. I love it. I'm not going to go into detail, but I think I have a lot more fun. Anyway, and I invest in my friends, my family, the people who keep me sane. So I was 23 back in 1985. So you can figure out how old I am. 58. Oh, no, don't. No, listen, no, don't, Mrs. Shut your face. No, yes, 58. Anyway, Frankie, get out the room. I'm trying to talk to Hayden here. What's it? Oh, yes, I went to Edinburgh. And I thought, I'm going to start again. I'm going to find out who I am by being around people who don't know me. And I just went up, I packed a bag and hitched up to Edinburgh and started a new life, and just little by little got to know people. And then I worked in a bookshop up there for several years. And it was while I was working in the bookshop that a man called Mr. Weller, Jeremy Weller, came in and asked me if I'd like to be in a play he was about to direct. This was 1990. And he said, I'm doing this play about homeless people called the company, the Grass Market Project. We've never done a show, but I'm using actual real homeless people from the streets and soup kitchens and hostels of Edinburgh, plus one or two people like yourself who want to play outside figures. Like, I'd love you to play the warden of the hostel they all live in. And I thought, well, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. Acting's the only thing I've ever really wanted to do, and the only thing I've ever done well, I think, where I think, I know how to do this without being taught. It's just what I do since childhood, really. So I jumped at that opportunity, and it was an incredible experience working with that company, and over 4 or 5 years of working with Jeremy Weller on several other semi-documentary shows like that, very hard-hitting, raw fringe pieces. I decided to do my own show, break away and do my own thing in 1996. When I was 34. And I did my show Think No Evil of Us, My Life with Kenneth Williams. This was a one-man show that I just wrote myself, and I'd never performed solo on stage before. And I just thought, I've got to do this. I've got to get this out of my system. First of all, the whole Kenneth Williams thing, which the connection there is that when I was 13, I wrote a story for Jackanory for this competition they had every year, the Jackanory story writing competition. So I wrote a story in a very Milligan-esque. Spike Milligan, I was obsessed with Spike Milligan and the Goon Show from about the age of 11. Still am, really. In fact, I went to see Spike Milligan at the Alexandra Theatre, Birmingham, which many of you will know. This was 1974. In fact, it was November 74, the night after the Birmingham pub bombings, strangely enough, which were heard on stage the night before. And so I persuaded my dad to take us to see my hero, Spike Milligan, when I was 12. And so we went, and I remember that there was not an empty seat in the theatre, despite the horror of what had happened the night before. And Spike Milligan, thanking the audience for coming out after the terrible events of the night before. It was a real moment of history, you know. So I saw him, and I also saw Morecambe and Wise at the Alexandra Theatre when I was 14. I went by myself in 1976 to see a matinee, an hour of Morecambe and Wise. Can you imagine now what we would pay to see them back again on stage? I feel so privileged. Anyway, all that is a roundabout way of saying that when I did kind of Think No Evil of Us in 96, I'd had a lifetime of wanting to be on stage, wanting to do it, and I just put myself on in the Fringe, paid for it myself, produced it, did everything myself, did the poster, and thank goodness it worked. And it was a hit. Some producers came in, saw it, said, would you like to tour? And I said, you bet. And that had, so 97 was my very first experience of touring, going all around the country for the whole year, doing one-nighters. And learning my trade, really, at the age of 34, really learning what it is to be a working, travelling, touring turn, you know, pitching up, as we're doing tonight. I mean, here we are in Durham, and tonight Jack Lane, who I work with at the moment, who's fantastic, we're doing Dad's Army radio show, and we'll be at the Gala Theatre Durham, so it's a very similar thing. Just touring the country, all these different kinds of theatres, different kinds of audiences, and doing the work and hoping they enjoy it.
What was it like then for being the young child with Kenneth Williams reading your story?
Well, I was 13, so I wasn't a child exactly. I was on the cusp of, you know, manhood, as it were. But I was obsessed with Milligan, as I say, and so I sent this Milligan-esque story in and was actually mortified when they said, your story will be read by Kenneth Williams, because I really was hoping they'd get Spike Milligan. Or Peter Sellers would have been I would have been quite happy with Peter Sellers. And it's Kenneth Williams, and I thought, wow. Well, the thing was, you know, I went to a Birmingham State School comprehensive in the 70s and was at that time struggling already with my sexuality. I knew that I wasn't supposed to fancy my football teacher and the other kids in my class, you know, that there were words that were used for people like that and that it was not seen as a good thing. And I thought, how am I going to deal with this? Because this is me. So at 13, I was really struggling. And it was a few years before I came out and thought, right, well, this is me. And if you don't like it, it's your problem. That was the attitude I later took. And I still take. But at 13, I was in terrible turmoil. And there I was. Suddenly my story was going to be read out by the campest man in England. So I thought, well, I could do without this, really. And so at school, it was after it was read, it was, first of all, I would constantly hear, wherever I went around the school, Jackanory, Jackanory, as a sort of taunt against me. And then lots of this kind of, because it was Kenneth Williams reading my story, and they thought it was hilarious that this very camp man had read my story when they all already had their suspicions about me. Perfectly correct, as it turns out. Children are very intuitive about these things. But anyway, so it... at the time, I was kind of mortified. And years later, I thought, actually, Kenneth Williams read my story on Jackanory. That's really cool. But at the time, it was not great. I did record it, though. The only recording that exists of that broadcast is one I made. We didn't even have of course, in 1975, there was no home video. We didn't even have a tape recorder. So my dad borrowed a portable tape recorder from a friend. One of those ones with those big chunky buttons that you press now, and a cassette, and I recorded by holding that up to the television, in front of, that's how I made the recording, and that's the recording I still have the tape, it still plays, believe it or not, and that's the only recording because the BBC, of course, wiped everything. Jackanory.
Silly them.
Well, they didn't realise, and actually, it was a lot to do, not just with the BBC, but Equity. I believe, I'm sure somebody from Equity will be listening to this, but I'm told there was a ruling at the time, which was that things could, in order to protect actors' work, they could only be shown a couple of times. Anything after that would be exploiting their work, and so they obviously didn't have the royalties system set up then. So things were shown twice and then junked. And this was seen as protecting the performers, really. So that I suffered from that, I suppose. But the only possibility that my story might still exist is that my bit was on film. The other stories were read by two unknown actors in the studio, and then every day on this week of prize-winning stories, they would pick up the phone in the studio, dial, and you'd then cut to film. Kenneth Williams in the back of a chauffeur-driven limousine, and he'd pick up the phone and goes, hello, yes, the Rag and Bone Man, yes, all right, thank you. Put the phone down, and that was the name of my story, the Rag and Bone Man. Then the film would stop, he'd get out the car, and he actually held up my drawings that I sent in, my own illustrations. He held them up to the camera and read the story, and actually read it very well. But
I would hope he would.
Well, he did, because he did everything he did very well, you know. But he was brilliant. I was so lucky to have my story read by the great man. But that's, as I say, the only recording that exists is mine.
Did you ever get to meet him?
No, I never met Kenneth Williams, and I probably a good thing. I might not have liked him. I know a lot of people who did meet him and didn't always gel. However, if I said to him, "You read my story," I'm sure he would instantly have seized on that and been nice to me, because he personally selected the stories he read. So out of thousands, and there is an article in the Radio Times of the week that it was broadcast, which was it was broadcast December the 10th, 1975. I have a copy of the Radio Times from that week, and there's a long article that he wrote describing the process of selecting the stories, although he didn't mention mine by name, which I would have loved, or in his diaries he didn't mention, but he did talk about the process and how there were thousands that they had to read and how arduous a process it was, and they were really looking for ones that stood out, that made him think, right, I could do some voices, so this is my kind of story, and that they all agreed on. So he selected the ones he wanted to read, and he selected mine, which is now, of course, I could have had a lovely conversation with him about that, couldn't I? I wish I'd met him. And he might have actually given me a bit of respect, because, you know, if he didn't respect people, he would let them know very quickly.
Yes, I read the diaries.
Yes.
Quite a cutting man.
He could be vile to people. He could also be, I know many people, including a lady who came up to me last week when I was, this was Sunday in fact, I was performing a new show I'm doing called Cato Street 1820, which is about the Cato Street plot of 200 years ago to murder the government. A lot of people still think it's quite a good idea. But I thought it was an interesting show. And a woman came up after and she said, I was a production assistant on Round the Horn. I said, really? And she said, yeah, I knew Kenneth very well. He used to, embarrass me in the street by shouting things about me when we were walking along, and sort of was all in fun, of course. But there she was. She was probably very young then. And it was amazing to hear from somebody saying, I thought he was great. He was really nice to me. Other people say he was horrid. But it depends on his mood, I suppose. And he was very, very thin-skinned, very fragile emotionally, Kenneth Williams. And so I think you had to be really careful. But I'm sure if I'd met him, it would have been a good friendship, I'm sure.
I'm sure I could just imagine you two just with the voices.
Well, yeah, I loved him, Fun Child, because he could do voices. Of course, that's why I loved The Goon Show. I loved Peter Sellers and Milligan's ability to do voices. And in fact, I liked anyone who could do funny voices. Right from very early childhood, that was something I latched onto. And so, of course, Williams was a master, absolute virtuoso vocal performer. And I would have been in awe. I'm sure I would love to have met him, but it might not have worked out well. He could be very, very cutting and cruel, even to people who are friends, So maybe we were too similar. I did once in a while. You get to meet your heroes. I did meet Quentin Crisp, the naked civil servant, as he was also known, in New York in the mid-90s when I lived there, and for a while. Again, another moment when I was rather like when I went to Edinburgh. I met somebody from New York and he said, "Why don't you come over and live?" So within a week or two of arriving, I was working in a laundromat in the Bronx, and also working as an artist model, which was you could do cash in hand then. Very interesting jobs. But also, there's Quentin Crisp in the phone book. You could call him up. And I did, and on several occasions just called him up and said, "Are you free?" And he'd say, "Oh yeah, hello." This voice would answer. Would you like to go for lunch next Thursday or whatever? And he would say, "Well, I'll just look in the sacred book." And he'd go and get his diary. Come back and he'd say, "Well, I can meet you at 2:00 on Thursday or whatever at the Cooper Square restaurant on 2nd Avenue, which is where he met everyone. And he'd always say the same thing. He said, "I shall be sitting in the window like a Dutch prostitute." And indeed he was. He'd rock up and there he would be with his purple hair sitting in the window. And you could sit and have 2 or 3 hours over a club sandwich and a few cups of coffee and just talk and talk and talk.
Wow.
And it was great. But he well, I realise now I'm going off on tangents, but I did mention Kenneth Williams to Quentin Crisp on one occasion when it was about 96, it was not long before I did the show. And I said, first of all, I really want to do a one-man show, but I don't have a script or a producer or a director or anything. And he said, you don't need a script, you don't need a producer, and you don't need a director. You just need to know what it is you want to say and go on and say it. And I thought, well, how amazing. And that's kind of what I did. I did do it all myself, my own way, without a director. And I think it was better for that, because it was very much my personal statement, unmediated by anybody else. I do believe that for performers, if you're thinking of doing some work of your own, why not just do it by yourself? You don't need to wait for all these people to come into place, a producer and all that. Just put your work together, decide what it is you really want to say, and then do it at the Edinburgh Fringe or wherever. Just do it. So that was what happened to me. I've gone off on many tangents now, but just try and anchor me down.
When you were a child then, did you go to the theatre much?
We did go to the theatre sometimes. I remember going to see my dad take us to Shakespeare things at the Birmingham Rep. And but actually the things that really stuck out with me were, I grew up in this town called Castle Bromwich. She's still there, looks exactly the same as it did in the 60s and 70s. And there was at Arden Hall was this thing called the Double L Club, the Look and Learn Club, which was a Saturday morning cinema club for kids. I don't think they do this anymore, but in those days you would, at 11 o'clock you'd all be at the Double L Club and you'd have proper films shown by a projectionist, and we got, obviously you'd have Children's Film Foundation and all that. All those type of films and adventure films, but the ones I loved, you would occasionally get a Lauren Hardy, or best of all, and this was a life-changing experience, Will Hay. They showed Oh Mr. Porter at the Double L Club. I don't know where they got the print, it must have been reissued in the 70s, but I was absolutely just howled with laughter all the way through. I just thought, this is my comedy. Will Hay doing his double takes and these angry blokes being really angry with each other. That's block British comedies like that. It's about irritation and people really being annoyed with each other. Look at Dad's Army. Everybody's irritated and annoyed with each other all the time. It's not about people being all lovey-dovey and getting on. It's about how we sort of pursue a common purpose whilst actually being really annoyed with each other. So in Dad's Army, they've got this common enemy, the Nazis, and they're all fighting against the Nazis, but at the same time, they're all, bickering with each other and finding fault with each other. And I think that's something about the British character in that, really, or maybe humans in general.
So that kind of stayed with you then, that whole love of comedy?
Well, I already had it. For some reason, I'm just one of these people who was born loving comedy of an earlier era. So I've always, as soon as I saw the Marx Brothers when I was 13 or 14, I became obsessed with Harpo and Groucho, and actually wrote to Groucho Marx when I was 15 and got his autograph. He sent me back a signed photograph to Dave from Groucho, which is something, well, obviously one of my greatest treasures. I wrote to other people as well who I really admired, like Fred Astaire. I saw Top Hat one afternoon when I was, I suppose, about 13, 14, and just was the music, him, the way he moved and the sets and all that stuff. I just wanted to be Fred Astaire. So all my pocket money then went on Fred Astaire records from the age of 13 onwards, along with Goon Show and all the rest of it. And I amassed a huge collection and knowledge before I'd even left school of what they now call the Great American Songbook. It wasn't called that in the 70s. It was just these songs Fred Astaire had recorded, but it is the Great American Songbook because all the great writers, Gershwin, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, they all wrote for Fred Astaire. So from a very early age I was steeped, and I've had this very strong consciousness of I was listening to very different music from everyone around me. All my friends were listening to, well, glam rock, I suppose, and whatever was out in the late 70s. But I was absolutely stuck in this world and very happily stuck in this world of the 30s, 40s, 50s. And then later was able to go and see performers of that era, like Sinatra, who was, I saw in about 1980, which was a great year to see him. Ella Fitzgerald, Peggy Lee, Mel Torme, Lena Horne. I saw all these performers. And again, like having seen Morecambe and Wise, I feel incredibly privileged now to have sat in the audience and watched the real masters of the art doing their thing. Particularly, I would say, Sinatra, obviously, but Peggy Lee was astounding. She hardly raised her voice for the whole concert, and yet she could have it swinging, she could have it as quiet as a church ceremony. It was just incredible performance. Ella Fitzgerald was just, complete virtuoso. You really were watching. When you listened and watched Ella, who I first saw with the Count Basie Orchestra. Can you imagine? This was about 1980, 81. I saw the Count Basie Orchestra with guest vocalist Ella Fitzgerald at the Festival Hall. That now seems like a dream I had or somebody else's life. But I miss all those performers, Because when I go, they're all dead. All the people I saw in the 70s, 80s, they're all gone now. There's no... who am I going to go and see now who can even touch them? I just miss them, I miss going to see Ella.
Another person that we touched on earlier on was Frankie Howerd.
Frankie Howerd.
You did the show all about Frankie.
Well, again, I never met Frankie Howerd, probably just as well, given the stories one hears about him. I think in the Me Too era, probably Frankie would be... Well, there were stories. He was from an era where gay men were very, very tortured, self-tortured, because it was illegal. It even was when I came out. People think homosexuality was legalised in 1967. Yeah, partially. But when I came out in, 1980 or thereabouts, you had to be 21. So my twin sister, my brother, they could go off and enjoy their lives, explore their sexuality, their emotional lives, but I was just terrified because I was going to be breaking the law. I'm a very good boy, I don't break the law. Although I did eventually. I thought, sod this. I've got a life to lead. I need to be doing what everybody else is doing. So I did eventually, and I'm sure many did, and some were even, prosecuted even then. But so it was growing up with a lot of fear about your sexuality, about the very thing that makes you who you are, really, or part of it. And so Frankie was of that generation who were very, very tortured and terrified of coming out and anybody knowing, even though they made themselves very camp. I mean, Kenneth Williams, Frankie Howerd are very, outrageously... They're gay men. You can see they are when you see them on stage, although the audiences at the time didn't necessarily make that connection between that and what they did in private. You then had someone like Larry Grayson who came along, who was much more, a real precursor of Julian Clary. I think you see a lot of Larry Grayson in Julian's work, and also Barry Humphries. Julian's taken all those influences and made them into something of his own brilliantly. But, as someone who was strongly influenced by those other performers, I can see in his work influences of the people who inspired him early on. Someone like Larry Grayson was much more open as a character. His character was a gay man. The character he played on stage, as it was, of course, off stage. And most of the jokes are very much obvious references. All the characters, Poppet in Pete and all that, the postman Everard. It's all very much basically saying, I'm a gay man, folks, and, this is what I like. And audiences got that without it being stated too obviously, and they loved it. They adored Larry Grayson. Someone like Frankie apparently was... I was told by Barry Cryer, who is a friend and wonderful man, a lovely, lovely man. And he said, I once made the mistake, I was in a restaurant, I was in Joe Allen with Frankie, and I made the mistake of mentioning Larry Grayson. And he said, my God, he said, he was banging on the table, everyone in the restaurant was turning around and looking. He was so angry that he said, that man stole my career, he stole my act. He really felt that Larry Grayson, and you could see why he felt that, because there are certain similarities in the way they perform, but he very much felt that he had ruined his career, and that Frankie really, really wanted to host the Generation Game. He really saw himself as the great host of the Generation Game and really tried for it and pushed for it, and then Larry Grayson got it, and he just was ready to commit murder, I think. He was so upset about it, and Barry said, I wish I'd never mentioned his name, because he got so upset and angry that I could see it wasn't doing him any good. So someone like Frankie, who you think of as being at the top of his tree professionally, was still tormented and by other performers, and then a very openly gay performer like Larry Grayson coming along holds up a terrible kind of challenge or light to him, and it's so he was very, very conflicted, as indeed were many men of that era and still are.
How was it then playing him?
Well, actually, I found that playing the part of Frankie, it came horribly easily. First of all, I did a show about him, a one-man show, which was a kind of a follow-up to Think No Evil of Us, My Life with Kenneth Williams. But I find the actual character, Frankie, listeners may know me, if they know me at all, to my connection with Frankie. It's from a play that was broadcast back in 2000, I think, was it 14 or 15, called Frankie Takes a Trip. Still available, you can find it on the internet. Frankie Takes a Trip, and it's called that because it's really about the therapy he underwent to try and cure his homosexuality in the 60s, and they gave him LSD. That was considered it may still be, I don't know, but they were using it to induce psychotic trances or psychedelic trances or whatever that would then allow the person to look at their problems in different ways, something like that. I don't know. You never really know with a medical profession what they're up to. I'm sorry, you don't. But they anyway, he went along with this thing, and so the play, written by Martin Hesford, who also wrote Fantabulosa, the television thing about Kenneth Williams, is about that, and it's about Frankie's relationship with Dennis Hamer, his partner of many, many years, 40 years. And it's Frankie, in a lot of it, he's very, very anxious, and I thought, you really need to show. But in fact, I didn't have to act it. Because apart from doing the voice, I knew exactly what he was going through, not so much in terms of sexuality, but of career. Because when an actor is out of work, of course, it's the worst feeling in the world. Anyone listening to this will be able to confirm it who's a performer. You do a good job, maybe, and then after 3 days, the glow wears off of your last triumph, and the anxiety starts to creep in again. Before you know it, you're going around the bend. You think, I'll never work again. They've all forgotten me. All that, So as soon as you're working again, you're happy. But yeah. It's really, really hard profession to be in if you're, mentally not unstable, but you need a lot of support really to get through it, to be able to do the job of getting up on stage and entertaining people. It's because of the times when you haven't got the work, and that's what happened to Frankie. His career was a real roller coaster, from being top of the tree to suddenly being out. And one of the reasons he was out was because he tended to behave, he was very neurotic and very anxious and was not easy to work with. And a lot of producers just thought, well, he's caused us so much trouble, let's not bother with him. And that was why he'd have long periods out of work, and then would kind of shed a layer of skin and return renewed. And he did that all his career, including right at the end when he had his big resurgence right at the end with the students there, with the audience. And that was, again, a return from a period of bleak unemployability.
Is it quite difficult then as an actor in those moments when the phone doesn't ring, the agent maybe doesn't contact you as much as they should?
I think the ideal thing for any actor really is to have a backup profession that you can fall back on. I don't. It's something I've never really figured out, is what else I can do to earn money. I can only seem to be able to do it from acting. But I'm 58 now. It's getting a bit late to find a secondary career. But, the periods when you're not working you're just out there. And that's why I do one-man shows, and create my own work. The great thing that saved me was having, in the last 2-3 years, was Dad's Army, or the Dad's Army radio show, which I'm doing at the moment. And we've been touring with for a couple of years, and has really, really helped. It's great fun to do. I'm working with Jack Lane, who is absolutely not only brilliant on stage, brilliant technically, he can also operate the lighting board, he can do anything. But also we're great friends and we laugh our heads off the whole time when we're travelling around, which makes it really good fun. But the times when you're not working, you look in your diary and you see these blank pages, that's terrifying, because you can't see how you're going to get out of it. You can't see what's coming up. And you have to rely a lot on faith and trust and all that stuff. I don't even have an agent at the moment. I should have one. But I've been through several over the years, and I've never found one who really seemed to get me. A lot of agents don't really understand actors who do their own work. And so they get a bit strange about you going to Edinburgh. They don't understand why you have to go to Edinburgh. I've had battles with several agents who didn't understand. Why are you going up to Edinburgh to play Boris Johnson? I mean, look at the money. It's only fringe wages. I know. This particular agent, I said, I know, but I just feel this is a really good script. Someone's offered me the part of Boris Johnson. Oh, yeah, yep. How you doing? Yep, nice to meet you. Yep, all that. Very easy to play. And, I mean, broad brushstrokes, that one. It's actually what's behind the act, as it were, that is worrying. But anyway, so the agent just said, well, it's only 3 weeks and I could be putting you up for stumping West End understudy roles. So I said, well, I'm going to do it. Well, if you really want to, yes, I am going to do it. Okay. And within a week of the show opening, the first review that came out was on page 3 of the Evening Standard. 4 stars out of 5, a great big picture of me saying, impressions, Master Benson, blah, does nails Boris, something like that. And so the agent was like, right, I'm coming up to Edinburgh. And I thought, well, I'm sorry, honey, you're too late, because you tried actively to dissuade me from doing it. In other words, you don't get it, do you? No agent, if there are any listening who really understand actors who need to do their own work, as well as being employable, jobbing actors, which I am as well, which I love. I love every aspect of the profession, and I don't just want to be doing solo. But an agent needs to really understand that some actors do create their own stuff and need to be given a bit of leeway and sometimes encouragement when they take a risk. And I've never yet found that agent, so at the moment I'm doing very well without one, thank you very much.
Have you always been a sponge then with voices? Because saying about the Goon Show, I could imagine you as a child, doing the voices in the playground and things. And
I do. I've obviously always had a kind of an assimilative nature. There's a photograph of me I found in one of those old snapshots from the 60s. Those with the white border, square, those little ones. Really lovely colours as well that you don't get on digital
like
pictures.
Sepia, yeah.
Well, colour, but just old sort of, I don't know how you describe it. There's something about old snapshots. And by the way, we now live in an era where everything's digital. So there'll be no more finding shoeboxes full of old photographs in the loft like we do. There's no hard copies of anything. It's all online. So I hope you all realise, everyone, there's going to be nothing left of our era whatsoever. Nobody writes letters, so it's all emails. You try and find an email you wrote 3 years ago. It's gone, unless you printed it out, or something you wrote, or a photograph, or music. It's all written on the cyber wind. There's no hard copies anymore. But I found a photograph of myself sitting in the garden. I was probably about 5, and there's this old man with us, this little family shot. There was an old man who was a friend of the family who was visiting, and I'm sitting there in this position that I can clearly see I'm imitating the old man and how he sat. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to evoke him. And it's something I did from a very, very early age. It's a natural thing, and I don't know why it should be, but it took me years and years as well to realise that I could actually make a living from it rather than just doing it for my own amusement or other people's. So yeah, and Jack, who I work with on Dad's Army, is exactly the same. He's always had an ear for and an ability to produce the sounds like a minor bird that he hears around him.
How many voices then do you do in the Dad's Army?
Well, we always say 25 characters, but in fact I've never counted. It doesn't matter, we just read the scripts and what voices are required. So I'll do who do I do? Well, obviously, John Le Mesurier, you see, Sergeant Wilson. Oh, yes. But now, when I was at school, I really wanted to be John Le Mesurier. I was really captivated by him because he seemed so calm and just to be floating above everything. Although he wasn't. In real life, he was a very anxious man. I know because his wife has told me. Very, very anxious indeed, which is why he had addictions like alcohol, smoking, including marijuana, which his doctor prescribed. His doctor prescribed did he smoke dope to try and get him off alcohol, which was not uncommon at the time for that to be suggested. And anyway, it's a long story. But so at school, I liked. I used to sort of think myself into. I didn't impersonate him, but I just would think about John Le Mesurier and just kind of adopt his mannerisms and his way of talking. You see, was very much like that. And would sort of become John Le Mesurier. And I can't explain it any other way, but while I'm thinking of him, I'm him. And in the show, we switch voices very, very quickly, sometimes talking to ourselves. Like Jack will do scenes where he plays Mannering, Pike, Jones, and others. And often it's Pike, Mannering, Jones talking to each other. And so I'll stand back and Jack will just do pages of the script by himself, switching. And then sometimes I might be... well, there's one episode, we're doing one called When You've Got to Go at the moment, where Pike gets called up. And there's a scene where you remember the northern character, the one who everyone remembers going Fleshing, Eric Longworth, who played the town clerk.
Yes.
Well, what's he say? He says, unfortunately, the church hall will have to be taken over for blood dawning. And, yes, His Reverence has agreed. Thank you very much, Mr. Yateman. Mr. Mannering is quite aware of that. That kind of thing. So you're going from the Virgin to the Vicar to the, all these other characters. And then there's Godfrey. Excuse me, sir. My sister Dolly makes very nice cucumber sandwiches. You should ask her to make some. Or something like that. And then Fraser, all these characters. Do them all. And so you just read the script and think, well, who do I need to be? I have to be Mrs. Fox in the new one, which is actually quite a hard voice. I can't get my voice all the way up to falsetto or a woman's voice, but I can suggest it. And the face as well, Pamela Condell, of course, who played Mrs. Fox, who I knew, little knowing I'd one day be playing her on stage. Lovely, lovely lady. She used to be in charge of she was the queen of the CAA club, the Club for Acts and Actors, some of you may know, on the Bedford Street in London, which is a real old school actors club with really old posters all over the wall, old variety posters. Wonderful. CAA, look it up.
You said earlier you have written pantomime as well.
Yeah.
Written a couple.
I was asked to write pantomimes but Cal McChrystal asked me, because I was doing a show in 2006. I always remember where I was, from what year it was I was doing each show. So 2006, I was doing a solo show, actually a two-man, because I had a pianist, Ben Stock, who was absolutely brilliant, and so it was really a two-man show. And it was a one-man Christmas show where I did all sorts of things, and I ended it with a big Panto finale, where we had a cow costume, we got members of the audience up to be Daisy and all that stuff, and I did reprise my Dame Foxy Trot, an amazing frock, which I bought from Salisbury Playhouse back in the day, all those years. Anyway, so you might have to do an edit here because my mind's gone blank.
That's fine.
What was I talking about?
About writing the script.
So in 2006, I was doing this show in the studio at Salisbury Playhouse, and Cal McChrystal said, would you be in the panto? And I said, I can't. I'm booked up to do this other one, but I can write it. So I wrote two pantos. First one, Cinderella, and next one following year, Dick Whittington. And I'm not steeped in all that stuff about these certain routines that you need to have, a slosh routine or whatever. I don't know all that stuff. So I just wrote the story of Cinderella, and very much thinking of what I could put in that would really get the kids angry and standing, because I just think it's amazing when you get a whole audience of kids all going shouting at a character they hate. And I thought, well, if I make the wicked stepmother, you give us some really good lies to tell. about what Cinderella has allegedly been saying behind her father's back about him. So she goes to him, she said, no, and I just loved it when I finally got to sit in the first performance and just heard those kids shouting and shouting, liar, 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 standing on their chairs, screaming at this woman. And she just stood there for about 10 minutes while this roar of outrage came from the audience about the fibs she'd been telling. I thought, how fabulous. That's what theatre should be like. Shakespeare, the audience should be going, get off, you liar. You know, why not? That's what they did in the old days. So I tried to write scenes that I thought would kick off emotions in the audience, but also for specific performers who I knew were going to be in it. One of them was Matt Bainton, who now is a big star. He did Horrible Histories, worked with James Corden on The Wrong, what's that thing?
The Wrong Man's.
Man's with an S on the end. I've never understood why it's got an S on the end. Why has it got Man's?
Never seen it.
No, Man's, I haven't either, but I remember it being on. I was working with Corden at the time on One Man, Two Governors, so I didn't watch it. But I knew Matt Bainton and others, Richard Thompson, who was in it, and some very good performers who'd worked with Cal McChrystal before, and I wrote stuff specifically for them. So their style, you know, and it was a really interesting experience to do it. I would just lock myself away in the reading rooms at the British Library, where I do most of my... I can't work at home, so I just get on the bus down to the British Library and sit in the reading rooms. Because, you know, you can't talk in there. You know, you just, once you're in there, you just have to work. So
you get quite distracted then?
It's very easy to get, no, the last thing you want to do is actually work. You know, so many millions, and now you have the internet, and there's a million reasons to sort of stop working for a minute and just check the phone, and then you've lost your flow completely. The best way to work, really, is to lock yourself somewhere with no internet, no other people, and just, you know, just lock yourself away and get it done. Go into your dream world, into your imagination, and then you start to hear the dialogue and how people, and how you might advance it. Yeah, the rhythm of it and all that. And but otherwise, in the noisy world with phones going off and internet and emails to check, very hard to really get your flow of concentration. But then again, you can also write a Panto script from a kit almost, if you want. You can put together a script saying, right, we'll have this routine, we'll have this song here, love song here, big comedy number here, blah, 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 there, done. You can easily put together a panto like that, and a very good one too, probably. But I just approached it from a different angle, more as a playwright, I suppose, just saying, well, these characters, what can I do with these characters to make them both amusing, but also make dramatic situations that get the audience going, caring about them, you know, what's going to happen to them.
Did you see Panto as a child?
Only a few. We didn't get regularly taken to see Pantos, to be honest. I remember more with like school ones. A school Panto and seeing the teachers dressed up was nothing could be more exciting and hilarious than that, could it? Seeing one of your male teachers dressed as a dame. It's like, wow, you know. So, and that, of course, those early experiences were ones that made me want to get up on stage as well, seeing other people doing it. But no, I wasn't steeped in it. I really wasn't. I must tell you one thing. My grandfather wrote a Panto script, because my granddad, who was a headmaster at the Wren's Nest School in Dudley, a very rough school. He was headmaster there for 40 years, from the 30s up to the 70s when he retired. I adored my granddad, and he was very theatrical as well, in that he would have been a great classical actor, but his father, my great-grandfather, said, you know, it's an unstable profession. You should go into something more stable like teaching, which he did. And of course, my great-grandfather was very right. It is an unstable profession, but I think my granddad would have been great. But as it was, he started the little theatre in Dudley for amateurs to teach them the techniques, which he'd done in the Lake District as a young headmaster in Burneside. And he wrote a Panto, Cinderella, which my dad found when he was going through all my granddad's old stuff and threw away. Bless him. I love my dad to death, but I thought, Dad, why did you throw it away? He did say, well, it was half eaten by mice, you know, it had been in an old box. I said, I know, but I would like to have read my granddad's Panto script. So, sorry, I shouldn't even mention that. But it's funny to think that all our best work might just end up in a skip, one day. But it served its purpose at the time.
Would you ever go back into Panto?
I think I probably would. The last time I played in Panto was playing Dame for Jamie Barry, who does loads down at Winchester and Winchester Theatre Royal. And he asked me, I think it was 2015, to do Dame in... I can't remember what it was now, but anyway, all I remember is that the princess was called Aurora.
That would be Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty, is it? Right, okay, It was Sleeping Beauty then. She was called Aurora, right. But I was the only, I was the only actor in the cast who could pronounce my R's. There was this new thing that actors don't pronounce their R's. So all I could hear was just Aurora on the tannoy. I was thinking, no, it's Aurora, not Aurora. But they were all going Aurora. Oh dear, drove me up the wall. But it was great fun, but very hard work. This is what you don't realize. When you're doing 3 shows a day, you do go into a very strange mental state where you're in survival mode, really, and it's fun, but you're halfway through the second show and you think, oh my God, I've got to do all this again? And then tomorrow, 3 again. And it's just, you have to force yourself to find the pleasure in every moment of the performance. And if you have good audiences in, particularly schools audiences, which I really enjoy because they're so with it, the schools audiences just give you so much back. They collectively, the noise they make is incredible. Then the evening shows are actually more like theatre, and you have to really work harder at them. But it is really hard work, and I think that's the only thing that stops one, is saying, well, what's the money like? So I've never been paid much to do Panto. I've always had the basic equity minimum. I've never been in one of those Pantos where they pay in thousands and thousands. Imagine being in the Palladium one. Imagine how much they must get paid for that. I could only dream of such money.
I reckon you'd be a very good baddie in Panto.
I'd love to do baddie, yes, absolutely. Any part, I don't mind. But, I think now if I did it, I'd have to make sure they were paying properly, because I can't. And I think a lot of, maybe I'm going to be controversial here, but what I hear is that a lot of the producers who are doing these Pantos nowadays, they're not really interested in the quality. It's just stack them high and sell it cheap, as it were. Make as much money as you can. Don't worry about the welfare of the performers and the other people involved, the crew, and how the long hours they're being asked to do. Just bash it out. And I think that's probably a very common attitude, because, as we know, Panto is the big money spinners. When most theatres make their money, that help them survive the rest of the year. That's fine, but you still want to have the pleasure and the quality. And I think I suppose everything has to change because of fashion. I don't really like now the way so much of it is about these pop songs which they put in, which were never really meant to be on stage. If you put in a big rock number, it was never meant to be a narrative song like you have in the show. So, yeah, I'm going to say no more.
You were in One Man, Two Governors, which was a huge hit.
Biggest hit the National had at the time, I think.
And some people describe that as a posh panto.
Yeah, well, it is. One Man, Two Governors was a posh panto, very much so, or an adult panto, because it comes from exactly the same roots as panto. It comes from commedia dell'arte. And, of course, One Man, Two Governors was based on Servant of Two Masters, Goldoni, which has all the stock characters that you recognise, not a dame, but it has, the Simple Simon character, as it were, and then it has the father, all the lovers, all the stock characters are there that you find in Panto, because it is absolutely the same route. And most importantly, the audience interaction. And that's what Cal McChrystal put in so brilliantly. All the big laughs that were in One Man, Two Governors were from Cal McChrystal. It was a joint direction between Nicholas Heitner and Cal. Nicholas Heitner, as we know, is a genius at mounting beautiful productions, but he's admitted quite freely, I'm not a comedy director, I need an expert. So he hired Cal McChrystal to come in and look after the nuts and bolts comedy of the show. And that was a brilliant, inspired choice, because Cal put in some laughs that I think totally made the show, like having the girl up from the audience. Lots of small things that are very panto, like, for instance, the Francis, the character, is the hero, is starving hungry all through the show, and he's longing to have an opportunity just to quickly put some food in his mouth, and he's serving two masters at the same time who don't know it about each other, and he has a big cauldron of soup, and he takes a big mouthful. Just at that moment his master comes in. Francis! So what does he do? So Cal's solution, which worked brilliantly, and he had to really fight for this because Heitner didn't really sort of get the logic of it. What he did was, so what happens, the master comes out. Francis, he's got a big mouthful of soup, so he puts the, the soup bowl, the soup cauldron down, slams the lid on, waits for about 3 seconds, and then goes, "Yes, boss." So the soup splurts out of his mouth in a huge, great cascade. And then, so what happens next? So the big argument in the rehearsals was, well, if he just spat soup out all over the place, obviously she's going to say something. Cal says, no. She just goes, "Be as quick as you can, I need you in here now," and goes back in the room. Doesn't say anything about it at all. That's what happens in comedy. Doesn't have to be commented on. You've got the laugh. That's enough. And it was a huge laugh every night. So the laugh would go on, and they would, Corden would just stand there with soup dripping down his face. Jemima Rooper, who was playing his boss, would just stare at him until the laugh died down, and then it was like, "I want to see you in my room now," and then she'd go out. You don't have to have a big explanation about why, the mess that he's made or anything like that. It's comedy and different rules apply, and Cal totally understands that. So he put gags like that in all the way through that brought the house down, but were not something that you would put in a proper stage play, because you'd have to have a big discussion, wouldn't you, about why this soup has just come out of his mouth.
That and the pacemaker.
Oh, the pacemaker, I'd forgotten that. Oh, yes, the pacemaker. Oh, yes. Yeah, I even had lines about it. I can't remember them now. I should tell you that my big interest in that show, I really found it. I usually, when I'm exploring a new part, I think, what performer does it remind me of? And I thought, well, that part has to be played by Jack Benny. So I used a lot of Jack Benny takes and timing, who's absolutely one of my heroes. Jack Benny, now I think people don't think much of Jack Benny because it's all black and white and past, but the master timer, and so sophisticated as a performer because he underplayed everything. Jack Benny was a great comedian who played straight for other people. So all the characters around him, often played by people like Mel Blanc and what have you, would bounce jokes off him, insults, and he would just absorb them and just do these little looks out to the audience. He wouldn't move his face at all. He would just stare at the audience, and they were imagining what he was thinking. And then he would do his next line back to whoever it was, and they would zing back another insult, and he'd just take it and just stare at the audience and then go back to it. When you watch a Jack Benny routine now, the timing is just immaculate.
Very similar to Will Hay, like you mentioned earlier.
Similar, except Will Hay was more knockabout, more comedy, yeah. But whereas Jack Benny underplayed, you see he hardly moves his face at all. He just stares. And I thought, I'm going to do that. So I used a lot of those takes to the audience in one night, and that was my real pleasure every night, was in evoking Jack Benny, but knowing that most people, certainly everyone on stage, and most people in the audience had forgotten all about Jack Benny, so I could steal with impunity.
Were you there the night that Her Madge turned up?
I was, and actually I was there the night the Queen came, and I can tell you the whole story. How do you know about that?
Oh, I find out these things.
Oh.
Martin Barras told me.
Oh, did he? Well, I remember that very well. It was about the second or third preview with the new cast when we were right at the Haymarket. So all the original cast were off and they were getting ready to go to Broadway. Now, I wasn't allowed to go to Broadway because of quotas. I was something like number 11 on the cast list and they could only take 10. So all the original cast left me. But actually, I was very happy because I had 2 further years' work at the Haymarket, beautiful I mean, a museum of theatre, really. A working museum. At the Haymarket with this new cast, including Owen Arthur, who played the lead, who was great. It's like Harry Seacombe, this lovely big idiotic Welshman that we all adored and we still do. And Martin was in it and many others. And it was actually a really fun company, the second company. But we were just doing previews. Literally, it was second or third preview. And we were doing the scene, my big scene, the end of Act 1, which is the big comedy knockout scene. And I was just about to go up the stairs from the underneath the stage. All our entrances were up flights of steps from the sub-stage onto the main stage. And the guy who was doing the technical stuff downstairs, he said, "Oh, someone's specialing tonight." And I said, "What, not the Queen?" He said, "I'm not saying anything." I thought, "Oh my God, it's the Queen." And so I went up and I was on stage and I was looking up, because I knew she was in the dress circle. I thought, I can't blooming well see her. And then at the end, when I was finished in that scene, I could go down into the substage, into the orchestra pit, and peer up into the audience, which I often used to do to see the reaction of how they would react to some of the big comedy laugh moments. It was amazing because they couldn't see me, but I could see them. So I peered up and I couldn't see them, but it was in the Evening Standard. That morning, the next day, Queen and Prince Philip come to see this comedy show. They were sneaked in. It wasn't a big thing. They wouldn't have to be there. They only came because they obviously had heard that it was funny and wanted to see it, which was nice. They weren't compelled to be there. But it was really one of the rare occasions when it could be said of the Queen that she saw me, but I didn't see her. Because I could not see any trace of her or Prince Philip. But usually it's the other way around. But on this occasion, she saw me, but I didn't see her. And we did the show, and it was the same thing we always did. It brought the house down, and I hope they had a good time. But I did think to myself, because the bits where in the Evening Standard said, the Queen said she particularly enjoyed the bit where the servant, played by Martin Barris on this occasion, originally by Tom Eden, Alfie falls down the stairs. And there's several bits where he will actually literally just appear to completely fall backwards downstairs and disappear with a crash. And I thought, well, it probably reminds you of some servant at Buckingham Palace in 1948. She said, it was rather bad. Anyway, we didn't have to line up or anything afterwards, none of that. It was a private visit. And so I can say that I performed for the Queen. There you go. Whatever.
Cato
Street, 1820.
1820.
Yeah.
Yes. When did you first kind of get interested in that?
Well, I first became curious about Cato Street plot. It was probably during one of the long periods when I wasn't working. And what I tend to do is, because, actors, what it's like, you do go nuts after a very short while. So to give my day some structure, I will tend to go down to the British Library, sit in the reading rooms and just read, think, research, whatever, and can be there all day. And it just keeps me grounded and sane. And I somehow came across well, first of all, it was through the song, The Ballad of Sam Hall, which is an old kind of music hall number about a man being taken to be hanged at Tyburn. And it's sung by him as he goes up in his cart along Oxford Street, as it now... Well, it was then Oxford Street, but it was before Marks and Spencer's and Primark. But taken up the 3-hour journey from Newgate, or the Old Bailey as it is now, past St Sepulchre's Church, all the way up High Holborn, along Oxford Street, for about 3 hours through massive crowds to get to Tyburn to be finished off. That's what used to happen up until the 1770s. And there was a song, The Ballad of Sam Hall. Oh, my name it is Sam Hall, chimney sweep, chimney sweep. People who know musical stuff may still remember that song. And that was the song that first interested me in the whole subject of what was going on in London at that time. That was 1840, it was first heard. So I Googled it. Ballad of Public Executions, London, 1840. And up came basically the Cato Street plot of 1820, in which 5 men were hanged and then beheaded outside Newgate for being part of a plot where they wanted to bring down the government violently. And so I was interested in that, but the execution, the description of it from the contemporary journals fascinated me. It is the ultimate in street theatre, isn't it, really, when you think about it? A public display where people stand on a little stage and are put to death before your very eyes. It seems almost unbelievable, but that was what used to happen, and people accepted it, that was appropriate entertainment for children as well, would be present on these days. Our ancestors were lovely people, weren't they?
Weren't they?
Charming. I'm glad they grew out of all that. But it was campaigners like William Makepeace Thackeray, Charles Dickens and all that who wrote about these things, and other reformers who finally managed to swing things, as it were, and get it stopped. So, but then it went, they still executed people, but in private, behind closed doors. And actually, I do think, as an actor, I'd rather have an audience to see me off than to do it with no one to say goodbye back in a horrible little cold room. Terrifying thought. But what really interested me about the description of the execution was that one of the condemned men, just before he was hanged, was screaming on the scaffold a song that was extremely well known at the time, called Give Me Death or Liberty. And it's described in all the accounts as that well-known song, that well-known radical song, Give Me Death or Liberty. And I've always thought I'd love to find that. So what was the song? And I've spent years searching for it. And then finally, it was only last May, I think it was, 2 researchers who I'd asked to help me, both at the same time, suddenly came up with the lead. And in my inbox, there were 2 emails, both of which took me right to the song, which was in the archives at the British Library. And it was from a show. It was written in 1774 for a show at Drury Lane. And in those days, when there was a big production, like in this case, Electra, big classical production, which was terribly reviewed. I've read the reviews and they said, boring, really stultifying. But in the middle, they would program what they called an interlude. And that would be like a little 20-minute panto almost. It would be a bright musical comedy. And in this case, it was called The Election. And it was about a local election that was coming up. And this character called Honest John the Baker, who must have had property because he was allowed to vote in the election, he wants to vote for Squire Trusty, the man of the people. But his wife wants him to vote for the aristocratic candidate, Sir Courtly. And this actual text of this little 20-minute trivial entertainment is still in the British Library with the full score by a long forgotten French composer called François Hippolyte Barthélemont. And in this show, there's a bit of dialogue, which I do in the show, where his wife says, Sir Courtly says if we'll but vote for him, he'll fill our pockets to the very brim. And Honest John says, I tell thee, Moll, this canting will not do. I'll sell my loaves, but not my conscience too. Shall I be perjured wife and damn my soul to get a guinea for a penny roll? Cue for a song. And the song is called Whilst Happy in My Native Land, and it includes the refrain, each patriot Briton's song should be, oh, give me death or liberty, oh, give me death or liberty, oh, give me death or liberty, oh, give me death or liberty. Fabulous song. And it brought the house down at Drury Lane in 1774. Everybody forgot about the interlude and the show it was from, but the song became absolutely a standard classic that all British people knew. And it's a real it's almost like an alternative national anthem in a way. It's good enough still to be sung. So when I found the sheet music and I gave it to a musician friend of mine, I said, could you play this for me? Let me hear it. And I heard the notes for the first time that man would have sung on the scaffold. Dee 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 dee. And I gave it to a friend of mine, Philip Geiler, who writes film and television music, and he did 3 beautiful arrangements of it in 3 different styles, and I use it in the show and teach it to the audience. So the audience leaves singing this song that their ancestors 200 years ago would have known very well and is now totally forgotten, and is a really great British anthem, really. It should be sung on football stadiums every weekend if it hadn't been if it hadn't disappeared. But it was such a thrill to find it and think, I can now bring this song back and have people singing it today, just as their ancestors did 200 years ago. So that's really what the heart of the show is in that song, Give Me Death or Liberty.
So as well as entertaining, it's also educational.
Oh, very much so. Oh, God, the audience. I did a lot of research over 4 years, and it took me into all sorts of areas, which I share with the audience and talk about. Oh, the political background at the time, the Peterloo Massacre and things like that, which a lot of people don't know anything about. And just the whole... And also what's going on now. To me, a history is only really of interest if it reflects on life now. And so Cater Street certainly does. When I was doing the show at the Edinburgh Fringe last summer, and I had my flyers that I was giving out in Edinburgh. Those of you who've played Edinburgh will know that, I mean, everyone's giving out their flyers. Come and see my show, come and see my show. People who live in Edinburgh get sick to death of it. Constantly for flyers being thrust in their faces and people doing their pitch. So I discovered that if I just said, this is a show about a plot to murder the government, people would immediately go, oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, Mrs. Ferguson, that is something for you, do you know? And one very smart gentleman who I saw with his mates, elderly gentleman, dressed in tweed, very distinguished, having a pint outside in the Pleasance courtyard, and I said, this is a show about plot to murder the government, sir. He said, oh, well, I'm ex-military and I've got a lot of friends who are very good snipers. I said, oh, really? And he said, aye. I said, are you serious? And he said, aye, start with Boris and pick the rest up one by one. It's the only way. And I thought, if I was the government, I'd be really worried now, because you've got really nice middle-class people who seem to think armed insurrection is a good idea. That was very much the feeling last summer. And I thought, well, I've really hit on something here, because that's what was going on 200 years ago in this country. The people they hated the government. And because they had then no democratic outlet for it, most people didn't have a vote, it came out the pressure was released in other ways, like these plots and what have you. Slowly they cottoned on, the powers that be, that if they just gave people the vote, then it would help. But it still didn't, because you never know who people are going to vote for, do you? Especially the working classes. So, they obviously didn't want to spread the power too much. And this opens up a whole can of worms. What's going on now? We're in uncharted territory politically, I think, aren't we, really? Nobody knows quite where we're headed. No. And it seems like an appropriate time to do the show.
Shall we change subject?
Yes.
Yes.
You can take all that out, I don't mind.
No, that's fine. I'm going to keep that in. Anything you'd still like to do with your career?
I don't know, really. It's a good point, because actually I'm very happy right now that I've got work coming up with Dad's Army. People love the show. I've got my new show, Cater Street. There's the old ones. Television has remained a closed book to me since Goodnight Sweetheart over 20 years ago. I played Noel Coward in Goodnight Sweetheart, which was a fabulous job, and that came about because Lawrence Marks and Maurice Grand saw me on stage doing Kenneth Williams and approached me afterwards. I didn't audition, I was given the part. And I'm waiting for someone else with as much intelligence and taste as they've got to actually think, let's use David Benson. But it doesn't happen. And I find auditioning for television, I'm just one of many who they've never heard of, because television people don't tend to know performers like me. I think they're in another world completely. So, and they have different criteria, they have different boxes they're ticking, and I've just never really made it with television, but I just keep thinking, hang on, the time will come eventually, and eventually, like Arnold Ridley, at the age of 70, whatever it was, when he got the part of Godfrey, he'll suddenly be discovered a national treasure when he thought it was all over. I think that's the best way to do it.
Leonard Pearce, wasn't it, as well? From
Leonard Pearce?
Only Fools and Horses.
Oh, right, yes.
In the last few years of his life, he became well known.
Yeah, I remember there's an interview with Larry Grayson on... I think the DVD, the ITV one, where he talks about, they ask him, how does it feel, having all these years struggling in obscurity, to suddenly have the number one dressing room? And he said something like, well, it's very nice, of course it's lovely, but, I didn't do it for that. And I say to young performers now, if you go into the profession, for fame and glory and riches, just do it for the fun. Don't worry about all the other stuff, just enjoy yourself. And then if it comes, fine. If not, well, at least you've had fun. And I just thought that's brilliant. That's exactly the right attitude. Don't be hankering after things that haven't been offered to you or that seem to be going well for other people, being envious and all that. So easy to do. Just do what you're doing and enjoy it, and then keep going. And that's the real triumph, that's the real prize. You may become a huge star, but then look at the people who are huge stars and see how happy they are. You know, I mean, Kenneth Williams was tortured by constantly, carry on, Kenny, everywhere he went. People saying, all right, Kenny, carry on, Kenny, all the time. He just hated it eventually. And I've always thought I quite like the fact that I'm working, but I'm still obscure. In fact, I'm one of the few performers I've become more obscure as I've gone on with my career. To the point where I've now ended up on your podcast.
Can I ask you two questions about Kenneth Williams? Because obviously you've done so much research on him.
Yeah.
And as a huge fan of Kenneth Williams as well.
Yeah.
Do you think he poisoned his dad?
Oh, he's poisoned his dad. Is that generally known now about the whole thing about...
I don't think, unless you've got a real interest in him, the circumstance of his dad.
His father swallowed poison that was in a bottle that should have been a cough mixture or something. I think we can't possibly tell. It's hard for me to see how Kenneth would have been able to contain that within himself if he'd actually caused his father's death. Then it would have been so serious. I'm not sure, though he was very disturbed, as we know, Kenneth, but I don't know. It's very hard to say. I know that there has been supposition about that, but I think we'll never know. It's possible he might have just thought, this man needs to die now. Obviously, he wasn't very warm towards him. He was obviously in a state, Charlie Williams, where he was causing a lot of grief and anxiety through, maybe it was dementia or something. They were very upset with him. But the idea of he would put bleach in a bottle that he knew his father was going to drink from, it's a horrible way to kill someone for a start, isn't it?
But it's all very suspicious, though, isn't it?
I suppose there'll always be a lingering suspicion, but he certainly never seems to have told anybody that he did it. He didn't confess to anyone, as far as I know. And I don't think he could have held that in himself, unless that's why he kind of went mad, which he did. And
the last thing regarding Kenneth Williams is, do you think he killed himself?
Yeah. I think that this whole thing about whether Kenneth committed suicide or not was something that came up, particularly when I was first doing the show, and some people felt strongly that he didn't. And I know there's been a book that's been published about him that suggests that he didn't. I just think all the evidence shows that, first of all, he thought or wrote about suicide a lot in his diary from the earliest age, really. He made many attempts that we see in the book, where he's a month before, in fact, he died. He's very much making preparations for that. And then the next day he says, oh, why didn't I do it last night? I could be out of this, but I've got to go on. He was in terrible, terrible pain with stomach stuff and... and then took what he called his poison, this stash of barbiturates that he kept for that purpose, and which he told friends who've spoken to me that he would use them for that purpose. So that looks very likely. However, he didn't leave a suicide note. He did leave his diaries, which end on a very, very bleak note. And he did also provide for his mother, which some people don't realise. In fact, through a friend, a mutual friend, he left her an annuity so that she would always have an annual income, rather than it all be swallowed up by a care home, which is what he was worried about. Because that still happens, that they will take the money and just use it up, and then you're on your own in a care home. So he wanted her to be looked after with this money from this annuity. I understand that's the case anyway. So he had provided for her, but he didn't leave a suicide note. I think it seems most like that's by easily the most unlikely explanation. But we can, again, like with the murder of his father or suicide or whatever it was, we can't really ever say for sure.
It's that horrible line, though, isn't it, at the end?
What's the bloody point? Yeah. And I think, but then again, that line, or lines like it, do occur earlier on in the diaries as well. It's not like it's out of the blue. But it seems like a man who would really run out of gas. And even if you listen to his last performance on Just a Minute, which was a few weeks before, he really doesn't sound well. And you can tell they're being quite gentle with him, dear Nicholas Parsons, who I knew very well, actually left us recently. They're being quite careful with him. And I don't know, I think it's emotionally he was what he called a suicidalist. That was his expression. And so I think it's very, very likely that he did. However, there is always that window of doubt. Maybe it was a mistake, like the great Judy Garland, who similarly died after an overdose, but nobody can really be sure whether she was intending that or result, or whether it was just a bleary mistake she made during the night when she was unattended, not on her own. And so we lost that great performer, Garland, as later with Kenneth. Some people maybe are just so bright, they're so full of talent that it's too much for them. I think that was certainly the case with someone like Judy Garland. She was tortured by this incredible voice that she had and this ability to take an audience and just, I don't know, bring them onto the stage with her in a way. And to make them feel that she was talking personally to them. An incredible effect she had on audiences. And I think that has a tremendous after effect on the performer, unless they're very well grounded and have good support and all the rest. Even on my level, when I did my Cater Street show the other night at the British Library, and it went very, very well. But the next day I was deflated. I didn't want to get out of bed. It wasn't that I'd done anything particularly physical, it's just that it takes quite a lot out of you in ways that you can't necessarily quantify. And I'm sure it's the same with any job, like politicians, whatever, anything, when you're putting yourself out to the public, projecting yourself in a way, takes a lot of energy.
What do you do to relax then?
Well, nothing I think I could repeat here. Apart from smoking marijuana, which I think is the most wonderful thing ever invented. What I actually do to relax when I'm in London, I go to my social club. I actually have a social club. It's in the East End of London. It's one of the last of the East End hammams, working men's spas, I suppose you could say. It's partly a health club, partly social. It's surrounded by industrial dystopia kind of scrapyards and things. You would never know it was there. And I'm not even going to say the name because it's a very special place to me. But it's the last of an East End culture that used to really be all over, East End, East Ham, Bethnal Green, what used to have these places run by the councils. They've all been closed now because councils don't want them. But there you will meet Orthodox Jews, Orthodox Muslims, black people, white, Russians, Ukrainians, people from all over the world who go there regularly, and you see Jews and Muslims absolutely having a wonderful time together. There's no tension, there's no aggro, nobody's fighting, and if they are, they shouldn't be there. It's just a place. That place should get the Nobel Peace Prize, I think. It shows how people can be if they're left to their own devices. And, I think it's like heaven. So I go there and I just totally relax, do massage, talk, meet people, and just... It's very hard to explain. It's a very private place to me. I'm not sure if I wanted to broadcast this because I don't want people showing up there, friends or people. But it's a really, really special place to me. And I have such a wide variety of friends who I know from there. Not show business at all, of course.
This leads me on to my very last question.
Oh.
Your dream pantomime. You can be in it. You can be in the stalls watching it. You can choose the production, and the cast can be alive or dead.
Well, I suppose if I went to a panto now, I'd want to see all the people I should have gone to see while they were still alive performing, like Les Dawson or Arthur Askey or any of those greats. I'd love to see them doing in a panto. And of course, it's always better to be in it than to be watching it. So I'd like to be doing a panto with Les Dawson. That's my dream. Doesn't matter what it is. Just that. I'd like to be in a panto with Les Dawson. In fact, Jeffrey Holland told me about being in a panto with him, and he said I was standing there in the wings and about to go on. I'm Simple Simon, and Les is the dame, and he reaches under his frock and pulls out a flask, takes a big swig, and says, "Do you want some?" I said, "Oh no, Les, no, I could never. Not before. Not when I go on stage. No." He said, "What? You mean you go out there alone?" Which actually I've heard Elaine Stritch do the same line, funnily enough. But I think we'll see Morecambe and Wise in a panto. One of those great Palladium pantos, all-star casts. You know? I'd love to either be in one or see one.
Do you like the camaraderie then of the gang?
I think that's the whole thing backstage. You know, you're like troops. You know, you've really got to get through this war together. And often you're crammed into one little tiny dressing room and you have to get on. If you don't, then it's really hard work. So that's what really makes it fun, is the camaraderie, the what's the word? The company spirit. Come on, encouraging each other, getting through as a team. I think if you're doing it on your own, it'd be impossible, but to do it as a good team is a wonderful thing. So, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what the panto is or who's in it, as long as it's a good company, you're having a good time.
I still want to see you as baddie at some point.
Which baddie do you think?
I don't know. Maybe
drag or male?
Either.
Yeah. No, I think it'd be fantastic. All you have to do is stand there on stage and be booed. You can stand there for 10 minutes and just let them exhaust themselves. That's what Paul O'Grady, who, bless his heart, I don't know at all, I wish I did. I remember some of the biggest laughs I've ever had in the theatre about 1990, 91. We used to go and see Lady Savage. And I last met him in Jerry's Club on Dean Street about 2 o'clock in the morning, about 2 years ago. I was about to leave, and then Paul O'Grady came in with his party. They'd been doing the panto up at Palladium, and they came down to Jerry's, and so we had a very brief chat, and I told him how marvellous I thought he was, and he was and I said, "Are you enjoying the panto?" And he said, "Oh yeah, it's great. I just stand there and they're all bowing. I'm saying, 'Come on, let's have ya, come on.'" And I was saying, "Well, and you just you enjoy that?" He said, "I love it. I just stand there, I don't have to do everything." I think he's great. I adore Paul O'Grady. I think he's a brilliant man. But I'd like to know him if he's listening. But anyway, what?
We were talking about your dream panto.
Well, I don't have one. I just think to be any panto, really, as long as it's a nice company and to be well paid. That's what my dream panto. I've done, as I said, I've done 3 or 4, and I've only ever had basic wage for it. And I would like to do one of those pantos where you have a really good time, really good company, and you get decent whack for it as well.
Well, you never know who's listening.
I'm available. Well, actually, I'm not very close. I think I'm doing Christmas Carol with Jack next. We did last year at Horsham, at the Capitol in Horsham. We did a 2-man Christmas Carol, and I played Scrooge and Jack played all the other characters. It was a really beautiful production. I was very proud of what we did, and I think we're doing that again next year. I did get a call. I know there's going to be quite a bit panto in London. Well, there's something I can't talk about yet, but I'm hoping it might come off. We'll see.
Watch this.
I'll be back.
Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure.